everyone. Happy Sunday. I pray and hope that each of you are experiencing a blessed life. Last night, Mother Moon just completed hosting an amazing week-long summit for peace on the Korean Peninsula. It was amazing. There were like 85 global leaders, current and former heads of state, who expressed their support towards a unified Korea. Some of the speakers included the current Cambodian Prime Minister, Hun Sen. Also, the former UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, was also a co-convener of the event. And we even had a message from the former President of America, President Trump, and former Vice President Pence was actually there in South Korea, also on stage, sharing a message of encouragement and the possibility of and hope towards a reunification of Korea. So it was a very special event. It happened to be in Korea. It was February 13th of 2022, which here in America is also the same day. And today happens to be also my blessing of marriage anniversary. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank my wife for being together and learning to love each other for 22 years. Happy anniversary, honey. Okay, so last week we talked about the sin effect, where we introduced the 4 kinds of sin that came about due to the human fall. If you can remember, there was original sin. That's at the very beginning where it all started. Then there was hereditary sin, which is all the sins that your particular ancestry caused. And third was the collective sin. This is the sin that you have by association, by your nationality or ethnicity. Even though you or your particular ancestors didn't do anything wrong, by association, you're partially responsible for that as well. And then finally, individual sin, and that's the sin that you personally cause. As we discussed last time, I introduced the concept of paying indemnity, or basically making amends to restore the relationships that were damaged due to those sins. So that's kind of what we covered last time. Now today, I wanted to go more deeply into the 4th sin, which is individual or personal sin. This is a sin that we are most responsible for because it's the sins that we commit during our lifetime, whereas the other 3 kinds of sin were committed by others before we were even born. So in order to effectively deal with our sins, we need to understand better the underlying 4 fallen natures that we inherited, which compels us to commit sin. Without addressing these 4 fallen natures, there is no way for us to ever be free of sin. So let's take a look at some passages on this topic in the Divine Principle. Eve inherited from the archangel all the proclivities incidental to his transgression against God when he bound her in blood ties through their sexual relationship. Adam, in turn, acquired the same inclinations when Eve bound him in blood ties through their sexual relationship. So one thing to note here is that the sexual act is a very powerful experience. And according to principle, it's not only a physical interaction, but a deeply spiritual one as well. So when you engage in a sexual union, you actually build a spiritual bond with the person that you're engaging with. So this way, we learn here that Eve inherited some of Lucifer's nature and feelings through their sexual union. And when Eve seduced Adam, he also inherited some of Eve's nature, which she got from Lucifer. Let's continue. These proclivities have become the root cause of the fallen inclinations in all people. They are the primary characteristics of our fallen nature. Adam and Eve, representing our first ancestors, thus passed down these fallen inclinations generation after generation to all their descendants. And that, unfortunately, is why we also have these fallen natures. Now, you may say that this is just a story, but it makes a lot of sense. And you may be surprised how real this really is. Let's take a look. Actually, the principle identifies 4 fallen natures, and I'm going to go over them one by one. I just want to say that although I'm explaining them independently, these 4 fallen natures are very intricately tied with each other. And it's not like, okay, let's do 1 and then 2 and then 3 and 4. It's almost like simultaneous. But we want to just make them distinct so that you have a very clear sense of each of these aspects of the 4 fallen natures. So let's start with the first one. The first is failing to take God's standpoint. A principal cause of the archangel's fall was his failure to love Adam with the same heart and perspective as God. Instead, he felt jealous of Adam. This led him to tempt Eve. So the first fallen nature is failure to see from God's viewpoint. Lucifer didn't see Adam and Eve from God's viewpoint. Instead, he looked at them from his own self-centered viewpoint, which led to envy and ultimately the fall. And as we go through these, you'll notice that actually the starting point of all of this always comes back to failure to see things from God's viewpoint. Let's continue. An example of this characteristic of the fallen nature is when a courtier feels jealous of the king's favorite instead of sincerely respecting him as one whom the king loves. You know, we see this happening all the time. One quick example is Jafar from Aladdin. It's a classic character in many stories, you know, the evil advisor who wants to take over everything, which is not his or hers. But it's not just in stories, it's in our lives as well. What are some examples of this first fallen nature of not seeing from God's viewpoint? Well, the main one associated to this is jealousy. Being jealous, for example, of your sibling doing better than you at school, or maybe a friend getting attention from someone that you like, or a colleague who got that promotion that you felt that you deserved. When have you failed to see others from God's viewpoint and been drawn to this self-centered feelings of jealousy instead of being genuinely happy for them? Now, a less known example of the first fallen nature is self-criticism or hatred. Actually, before I go into that one, that's a really important part. I want to go back and just give an example. I remember there was one time when I was working in CARP, which is the Collegiate Association for the Research of Principle. It's a campus-led ministry. And I was working as staff there for maybe 4 or 5 years, and then there was a kind of a succession planning, and they were going to appoint the new president. And I fully expected that I was going to be appointed as the CARP president at that time. But my good buddy, he was also a core staff, and he was appointed as the president, and it was quite disappointing. I had so many reasons why it should have been me at that time. Of course, hindsight 2020, I'm glad that that didn't happen at that particular time. But my point is, the feelings are real, you know, especially if you worked hard for something, and when someone else gets something that you want, it's very easy to feel jealous. But in that moment, it's okay to feel that way. But if we go back to seeing from God's viewpoint, it's not about me. How does God view the situation? that actually can help you stay centered even in those kind of situations. Okay, now let's move on to the less known example of the first fallen nature, which is self-criticism and self-hatred. Okay, this is an example of not seeing yourself from God's viewpoint. It's one thing about not seeing others from God's viewpoint, but many of us struggle with not seeing ourselves from God's viewpoint. The most common side effect of this is not feeling good enough. And if you really think about it, all envy stems from this, is not feeling your own self-worth, your own self-value. This point really came up for me in an experience I had. I was, when my son was really young, he was 2 or 3 years old, and he was kicking a ball around in a field towards a goal. And I was really encouraging him, like, you can do it. And he kind of kicked the ball, but he was tripping over it. And anyway, he was almost about to get the goal. Like, he was literally a foot away, but he kicked it sideways, and it didn't go in the goal. Of course, I was disappointed, but I wanted to encourage him. So I kept encouraging him to try again. But he was really depressed. He was down on himself. He said, I can't do this. I can't. And I kept trying to encourage him, but he didn't want to try again. And I remember, thinking, God must feel that way towards each of us. God wants us to keep going or kind of fulfill our potential, but we hold ourselves back. We say, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I can't do that. And actually, if you believe that God is your parent, then God is, just imagine the kind of frustration. Well, like, he wants the best for us, but he can't make us do things, right? So it's kind of up to us, is that when we put ourselves down, we're actually doing a disservice to God, because we're actually not seeing ourselves, actually a disservice to ourselves, because we're not seeing ourselves for our true potential as true sons and daughters of God. So I want to really emphasize this point, is that, not seeing from God's viewpoint includes not seeing yourself from God's viewpoint. Okay, let's continue with the second fallen nature. Let's read. The second is leaving one's proper position. Seeking more of God's love, Lucifer desired to enjoy the same position of love in the human world as he had in the angelic world. This unrighteous desire caused him to leave his position and fall. So the second fallen nature is leaving your proper position. Lucifer left his position as a humble servant to God, and by default, a servant to Adam and Eve, who were the children of God. And instead, he sought to take over what was not his. The kingdom was not his. He was supposed to be a servant to support God in providing the kingdom for Adam and Eve. But instead, he sought after what was not his, and that was Lucifer leaving his proper position as an object to God and as a servant to both God and Adam and Eve. Let's continue reading. People are induced by unrighteous desires to step beyond the bounds of what is right and overreach themselves because of this primary characteristic of the fallen nature. So how does this apply to us? Whenever you leave your position as an object to God, you are leaving your proper position. Whenever you have unrighteous thoughts, or when your physical desires dominate your spiritual desires, you are leaving your proper position as an object partner to God. Actually, most of the 7 deadly sins fall in this category. For example, lust. You're desiring physical pleasure over a spiritual union. Or gluttony. You're being dominated by your desire for food. And also you're not treating your body as a temple of God, right? You're just overindulging and you're letting your physical desires be more important than your spiritual desires. In fact, in that kind of situation, you're not thinking about God, right? When you're committing any of these sins. Another common deadly sin is pride, arrogance, thinking it's all about you, right? If you maintain an object position to God, then you can actually curtail this arrogance because you know that whatever gift or ability or success you had, it's out of the grace of God that it happened. Even your talents were given by God. So you can stay humble in that kind of situation. But when you leave that proper position as an object partner to God, then you are susceptible to these deadly sins. Now, another common one I want to say is sloth. Yes, laziness. We all experience this sometimes, but when we seek excessive comfort, it's it's a physical desire, right? We don't want to do anything. We want to just lie down, play video games, watch Netflix, and do that all day. That's actually leaving a proper position of you maintaining your role as object to God. Now, I'm not saying that you can't do any of those things at all times. I'm just saying anything in excess is probably you really forgetting your position as an object partner to God or as a temple of God, which just imagine a parent watching over you all the time, right? How would a parent feel? Of course, your parent wants you to do well, wants you to make the most of your life, wants you to experience joy and success. That's basically how God feels towards each of us. But that's if we're paying attention to that, right? So when have you left your proper position as an object to God? Or let your physical needs be subject over your spiritual health? Trying to think of an example here about leaving my proper position. I guess the most common one I can think of is when I thought critically about my former boss, one of my former bosses. I've had like 7. But point is that when I think I can do a better job than my boss, I'm actually leaving my proper position because it's not my job to criticize my boss's him doing. It's actually my boss's boss that needs to decide whether they're doing a good job. So yeah, that's probably my most common experience is when I think I can do better. In that situation, it's really important to do your best to maintain your position as an object to your boss and give constructive feedback, support them, help them do their best in fulfilling their job. That's really your job as an object partner. So that's how you would do it. But very commonly, leaving your proper position is when you no longer stay object to God and also to your, direct supervisor. Okay, another example I just want to share quickly is not wanting to tithe. Okay, you say, oh, I don't want to tithe because, that pastor, he doesn't know how to manage money. I don't want to give money if I don't think that they can do a good job with it. Well, guess what? Tithing is actually a spiritual practice between you and God. It's not about how it's being used. It's your spiritual practice of you offering 10% back to God. So it's not even about how effective an administrator that pastor is. It's about you and your responsibility to offer all things and not be subjugated by material things by offering 10% back to God. So maintaining a proper position to God includes the practice of tithing. Same thing with attending service. Again, you have different options, but it's by maintaining objectivity to God that you're able to not dependent or blame others for your own spiritual health. Okay, let's continue with the third fallen nature. I'm dwelling on this one too much. Okay, third fallen nature. Oh, I guess I got to read this. Yeah, hold on. Yeah, let's continue to read. The third is reversing dominion. The angel who was supposed to come under the dominion of human beings instead dominated Eve. Then Eve, who was supposed to come under the dominion of Adam, dominated him instead. So the third fallen nature is reversing the proper order. Lucifer was supposed to be object to Adam and Eve, but instead he became subject over them. Eve then repeated the same thing. Instead of being an object partner to Adam, she took subjectivity over him. Let's continue. This disruption of the proper order has borne bitter fruit. Human society is thrown out of order by people who leave their proper position and then reverse the order of dominion. Whenever you take over something that is not yours, you're acting on this third fallen nature of reversing dominion. So some examples include wrath. When you let your frustration be subject over God's love for the person that you're angry at, that's actually an example of reversing dominion. Okay. Another, example is subversion, or an extreme case of this is a coup d'etat, right? When you actually take over what's not yours out of the proper order, then you're reversing dominion. If you look at human history, there's so many examples of this, right? This is basically an example of the third fallen nature of reversing dominion. So when have you reversed dominion in a relationship? Yeah, one example I want to share here is, even in our own ministry, we've had splinter groups, and I think this is a very common, and this is not just us, any religion, they have this happening. But the fundamental issue is when one person feels that they can do a better job leading this ministry than the founders or the original intent, then that's what leads to splinter groups, where instead of staying object to that original intention or to God's intention, they try to take it over. Now, if they independently do it themselves, that's one thing, but taking over the foundation of something that already existed, that's really a violation of principle. So, yeah, that's happened. We just need to be careful. Even in that situation, if you're I was working under that leadership, I still had to maintain my object position to support them, but knowing that it's above me that will address that situation. Anyway, without getting too complicated, let's go to the fourth fallen nature. Fourth is multiplying the criminal act. After her fall, had Eve not repeated her sin by seducing Adam, Adam would have remained whole. The restoration of Eve alone would have been relatively easy. However, Eve spread her sin to others by inducing Adam to fall. So the fourth fallen nature is simply multiplying evil. As it says here, Eve unfortunately multiplied her sin by seducing Adam. And again, it would have been a lot easier to fix the fall had Adam not fallen as well. So let's continue. The proclivity of evil people to entangle others in an expanding web of crime stems from this primary characteristic of the fallen nature. So whenever you spread negativity, you're acting on this fourth fallen nature of multiplying evil. They say misery loves company. Gangs are fundamentally designed by this nature. Also, people tend to justify their actions by getting others to join them in sinning, right? It doesn't feel as bad if someone else is doing it, or if someone else is already doing it, you don't feel as bad joining them because someone else is already doing it, right? So it's kind of like you steal the cookie, but you share it with your sibling. so you're not the only one that'll get in trouble. So this is a very common fallen nature that we act on. Whenever we criticize others or gossip about someone else, when outside of, not in front of them, you're not talking with them, but you're talking about them, that's multiplying evil. When have you done this? I think this happens on small levels, even like last night. I mean, it was an amazing program, but it was 4 hours long, so I couldn't help myself but complain a little bit, sideways, saying, when are we gonna get to a more normal kind of hours? But yeah, it's important that you notice it when you're committing that, and then acknowledge it, and then find ways to manage these fallen natures, which we all have. I found one image online that conveyed an example of how negativity can spread even beyond the person you're talking about. So this is I think it's a painting or a poster. It's from Richard Sargent, and it's titled Anger Transference, 1954. So, it's pretty self-explanatory, but the boss gets angry at the employee. Employee goes home and expresses the anger to the wife. Wife gets that pent-up energy and, gets angry at the child and poor cat. The poor cat is being also scolded by the child. So this is very common, right? And this is an example of multiplying evil. When you spread negativity, that energy actually tends to transfer. So someone has to break that trend, otherwise it continues. And that's basically what we see in human history. I was thinking just for a moment that COVID might be a good analogy towards negativity, right? It spreads as long as you're in the same room, right? You're in talking distance with somebody, then it can spread. Even something like selfishness is quite contagious, and some sins will make you sick temporarily, and some sins will kill you. So yeah, one way to immunize yourself against these fallen natures and sinning is to know the truth. So the power of truth can really protect you. You may not be completely immune, you'll be affected, but it'll have a less impact on you the more you understand the truth. So with that, I want to go into the 4 original natures. The original natures is basically the reverse of the 4 fallen natures. So, and this is the best way to address the fallen natures. So the original nature is basically, for number 1, instead of failing to see from God's viewpoint, it's see from God's viewpoint, right? So in any situation, always ask yourself, what does God think about this? How would God feel about this? What would a loving heavenly parent feel about this situation? This has helped me more than anything else to remind me about what's the proper order. Second, maintain your proper position. Even if you're not feeling it, even if you disagree, always maintain and stay true as an object to God. And if you have a good boss, hopefully, or a boss, even in a work situation, it would be unity with them. In a spiritual pastoral situation, it's in unity with your pastor. And third, instead of reversing dominion, do not reverse dominion. I guess that's very simple and clear, right? Even if you feel it, don't act on it. Don't do a coup d'etat. Find a way to work it out. Talk with them and try to find a good solution. And finally, instead of multiplying evil, multiply goodness. So instead of talking bad about people, you might be like, hey, I understand you don't think he's doing a great job, but hey, think about all the stress that international headquarters had to put that program together. All we have to do is show up. So in that way, even if you're feeling differently, you can spread positivity. So in summary, there are 4 fallen natures that compel us to sin. First is not seeing from God's viewpoint. Second is leaving your proper position as an object partner to God. Third is reversing dominion. And fourth is multiplying evil. And good news is there are 4 original natures that we can use and strengthen to overcome these natures. So as I mentioned last time, knowing is half the battle. I recently started researching a diet program called Noom, and it addresses weight loss not by limiting your food intake, like controlling what to eat, what not to eat, but by educating you on your mindset around food. So I think that dealing with sin effectively requires a similar approach. Trying just limiting your sin or not sinning is like a fad diet, on and off again, which can be frustrating and discouraging. Instead, let's address the underlying tendencies to sin by acknowledging and being aware of the fallen natures as they show up, and strengthening or counteracting them with our original natures. And with practice, we can get better at addressing them as they surface. So with that in mind, may God bless you and your family this week. And for those from America, enjoy Super Bowl Sunday. Thank you very much.